Today we have a tale of two classicals. One is so new the strings haven't even finished stretching. The other is over 90 years old. And the task is to convert them both to left-handed play. First up we have a Yamaha. This is a GC32S, which is not your typical budget guitar marketed for the first-time student. This is at the very, very high end of their range. This is crafted in Japan by crafts-type people from top-grade materials. Something I've read about from a number of different sources involves the expectation by Japanese consumers of specific elements in guitars of different price points. The market there is stratified in a really rigid way, and they're very picky about what they expect. This is a European spruce top on this because that is what guitars in this price bracket have. They wouldn't try to sell you one that didn't because it wouldn't be accepted, ever. This is made with nice Indian rosewood. They also make a nearly identical model with Madagascar rosewood. There are some issues that pop up when converting to lefty on classical guitars. On steel strings we usually have to deal with the saddle compensation issue. The saddles are slanted, so the bass strings are longer than the treble ones. When we reverse it without changing that, we end up with a guitar that does not intonate. But if we can deal with that, steel string conversion usually just involves a new nut. On a classical, usually the saddle is straight across. There's no slant necessary because nylon strings are much more close in tension between each other. So that's easy. There is another issue though. Many classical guitars are constructed with a fretboard that, though it's not radiused like on a steel string, it slants progressively from the treble side to the bass, while also tapering in thickness as it approaches the sound hole. This is to allow more room for the bass strings to vibrate. Their arc of travel is wider, and when you're playing fortissimo, you don't want them slapping against the frets and buzzing. We'll complicate that more by noting that in traditional flamenco guitars, they actually incorporate that buzzing as part of the sound. They like a certain amount of rattle, if they're old school kind of players. So the older guitars have little or no taper to their fretboards. Can you see why this taper is an issue? When reversed, the high E string is now getting progressively farther from the frets as it nears the body. Sometimes there's enough saddle height to play with to change that. On the bass side, we might not have enough room for that wide string arc if we try to play loud. In this case, it's probably not an issue. This player is into sort of bossa nova, South American kind of playing that is not, a lot of super hard rasgueado kind of stuff. So I think we'll be okay in that regard. Checking out the action, steel string players are absolutely agog when they see what classical people play with. This is 9/64ths on the bass side and 7/64ths on the treble, which is about 3.5 millimeters, about 2.8. And that is a low action for a concert classical guitar. The necks on these are set in sort of reverse to a steel string, so they're actually pitched up slightly from the body. They want that high action. And like I say, certain concert classical guitarists I know would play with 4 millimeters and 3.5. So, this is kind of almost a hybrid action actually. There's some room for it to come down some more, which we will do. The plane of the frets on a classical meets the front edge of the bridge well below its top. This is normal. And we would expect the strings to be hanging out somewhere in the range of 11 to 13 millimeters above the surface of the soundboard. Half an inch-ish. Older guitars, that'll sometimes be lower. Boys and girls, if you're going to be changing strings on a brand new classical, or even an old classical, especially if it's not your own, protect the area behind the tie block. I was looking at an almost brand new classical a few weeks ago, and I noticed that there were ding marks where the ends of the strings had bounced against the top. Especially if it's a cedar top, those things are so incredibly soft, and oftentimes these things have very, very little finish on them. So you'll put dents in just as quick as, I mean, you could touch it and you'll dent it. So just protect that area, please. Now we aim to make this saddle lower. I'm going to maintain the taper. We're going to reverse it end for end. In this case we have a back-filed G string, which does not really affect us because it's pointing in the correct direction. I'm going to take material off the top of this and also reorient the slant of the top so that it's facing the nut now. It's kind of reversed at this point. The strings would be taking off along the back edge. This was obviously designed to have it come off the front edge. So we're going to lose about 3/4 of a millimeter or so, which is going to lower the action slightly and still give us enough room for a decent break angle. I'm going to set my little marking gauge here to about the depth of that G-string cutback and mark a line on the top of the nut to file to. I'll smooth out any file marks with progressively finer sandpaper. So that is now left-handed. And the nut is not glued in. It comes out fairly easily. Now then, a horse of a different color. Very different guitar. This one is from a well-regarded maker, Juan Gala Rodriguez, who was born in Malaga, Spain in 1876, and he's part of a storied lineage of makers. His father, Juan Galán Caro, and his brother Rafael also built, and they were part of a school that stretches back to Antonio de Lorca Garcia in the first half of the 19th century. Malaga is in southern Spain, and like various other Andalusian cities, has a distinct culture of guitar making. The aficionado can probably differentiate between guitars built in Malaga from those in Granada or Cadiz, based on things like the style of decoration and the rosette motifs and how the heel is carved, various shapes that are employed, that sort of thing. Juan Galán was part of a migration of builders that left Spain around the turn of the 20th century, I think he left in 1906, to take up residence in South America, in his case Buenos Aires, Argentina. Compared to Spain, there was a bit of an economic boom going on there at that time, and a lot more opportunity to advance. More money was floating around, more people could afford to pay for a guitar, and there were musical developments happening there as well. It was becoming a real cultural center. That's an exuberant headstock shape. It is sort of Torres inspired, but magnified. Juan Galán appears in Sheldon Ehrlich's book titled A Collection of Fine Spanish Guitars, which is one of the serious catalogs of the top makers. That's a book I don't own and probably never will be able to afford. Suffice it to say, if a maker is in there, it's kind of a mark of distinction, and I'm quite excited to get a look at this thing. This was built in 1931, so this is sort of the second half of Mr. Galán's career. This is like the definition of old school Spanish classical. Everything about it. It's interesting. It's got a rounded heel profile. It's Brazilian rosewood, but it's of a quality that you will never see again. It's so straight-grained that it's kind of hard to pick it up as being Brazilian until you look carefully at the pore structure. But it definitely is. It's suffered a few things over the years. Now these are built incredibly thin. It's exceptionally light. It's the first impression you get when you pick it up. Some cracks have been patched in the soundboard. Bear with the sound of roofing going on in the background while I talk about this rosette. These were, of course, most of them built in place on the instrument from individual blocks and strips of veneer for the line work. And this is very characteristic of early 20th century Spanish rosette construction. The elements aren't too tiny, they're not ultra fiddly, they're just sort of a nice size to work with if you're trying to, get a guitar finished and not spend 4 days installing a rosette. And most of these instruments at this point have faded considerably. The dies that were used in the construction are not very light fast, and at this point they all tend to look kind of almost two-tone, but you can bet that this was much more exuberant in its coloring when it started off. Still, as a graphic statement, it's really good. I like it. This guitar has had a refret and, I believe, a fretboard replacement, which happens sometimes. They can get so worn that it's the best course of action. Or sometimes it's done to correct neck angle issues, which can pop up over a century of play. You've seen me do that with a Ramirez, changing the neck angle. In this case, there is not a whole lot of extra saddle to play with. It's getting low there. We're about 10 millimeters off the top of the soundboard, which is okay. In an instrument of this age and of this construction, sometimes that's the thing that has kept it going. You don't want too much torque on these exceptionally thin tops. Now I'm just going to play this for a little while before I convert it to a left E, because I want the experience. I want to hear how it sounds and feel how it feels. And obviously I'm not a classical player and I don't have nails, so this is not a good classical sound. But it'll tell me something about it. Action on this one is 10/64, which is about 4 millimeters on the bass side, and 6 on the treble, which would be like 2.3, 2.4. The interior of this guitar is kind of amazing. The surfaces have been sealed with varnish, which some makers did. Of real interest to me is the fact that the fan braces continue all the way up into the area around the sound hole, which is a concept pioneered by Torres. However, in this case, the main transverse brace under the sound hole does not contact the top. It sits atop the braces. It's like cantilevered from side to side with the braces being the support. Never seen that before. There's a gap there of a couple of millimeters. Wild stuff. The Yamaha's sound hole is large enough for me to fit my phone in, so you can get a look at that. This is a very simple bracing design. 5 fans, 1 angled bar, no cutoff bars. It's all very clean. The original nut has been shimmed. The nut width on the Galan is slightly narrower than what we consider modern standard. This is around 49.5 millimeters. 52 is what we usually see these days. The saddle profile is such that I don't think I'm going to be able to reuse this one. I rough thickness the saddle blank on my drum sander, and now I'll fit it precisely after hand sanding it. This saddle slot tapers slightly from one side to the other, which is not uncommon on these old guitars. These were often hand-cut channels, so I have to taper the blank along with it. Here I'll mark out the height of the saddle, giving myself a little bit of extra to play around with. I'll file an angle on the top of the saddle, which is also curved, so the string has a nice clean takeoff point. Not a whole lot of extra height on this one. It's another foray into nut making. I do this a lot. If you're going to use the StewMac string spacing rule, remember that you're making a left-handed nut. Otherwise you could go extremely wrong.
There's something about the repetitive nature of repair work versus building. A classical guitar maker might get to do this job once a month. In a busy repair shop, it's probably 2 or 3 times a week.
A couple of subtleties. I occasionally see pictures of people online roughing in a nut that has a whole lot of extra material left on it. Like if you've got to file through 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters before you get down to the line you need to be, it's very easy to get, off course and shift over 1 millimeter or 2. So remove as much as you can before you get into this layout stage. Another nice thing to do is mark the positions of the strings on the front surface of the nut, because as you're filing you'll lose that top pencil line, and it's nice to have something to shoot to. If you get offline you can get back on track by sighting down the front surface. Using some fancy labella strings, they don't give you the string gauges on the pack. I'm frowning and luthier. Had to go and look them up. Making a left-handed nut. Don't forget that you're making a left-handed nut. There are people laughing, and there are other people who are crying because they remember. You're making a left-handed nut. You're stringing a lefty guitar. Don't forget. Stringing up a classical, you know how when we're doing steel strings we like to tug on the strings and stretch them, as it were? We don't do that with nylon strings because you can cause localized distortion in the monofilament and you will end up with terrible tuning and all kinds of strange issues. Let them stretch in naturally. It's really annoying because it takes forever, but if you start tugging on them, they won't behave correctly. And like on a steel string, we have to dial in the amount of string clearance over the first fret. That varies a little bit. Some classical players really want to dig in first position. Nylon strings are forgiving enough in their tuning that they get away with it, but they want extra resistance. I also want to polish the nut slots with some 1200 grit sandpaper. Want them smooth.
Then I get to do it all over again for the Yamaha nut. Second verse is very much like the first.
Okay, all set up. This has got the Labella 850B Elite series on it, which is a black nylon metal with a golden alloy. I don't think it's gold, otherwise they'd probably call it gold, but they call it golden. Maybe there's less tarnish, I'm not sure. In terms of action, we're down to 3.5 millimeters on the bass side and 3 millimeters even on the treble, which is sort of a hybrid. It's kind of a jazzy action, getting down towards flamenco territory, but not quite, and certainly lower than your average classical person would want. So, yeah, this should do well for the bossa nova. I'll try and make some sounds, again, upside down, backwards, and not a classical player. Mm-hmm.